Hey, what's up guys? Today in this video, let's look at the context inside Adonis.js. So to understand the framework, or rather in any framework, it is important to understand the request lifecycle and what happens inside the request lifecycle, what all things do you have, how the response is created, things like that, okay? And context in Adonis is a very important part. As it says, right, HTTP context is the request specific object that holds the information like request body, cookies, headers, and even the logged in user. Now, this definitely means that whenever we are trying to access the request object, we are trying to send a response, if we are looking at things like whether the user is logged in or not, then the HTTP context is something which we are supposed to work with. Okay. Obviously, these are passed by reference, so you can understand that it's a single instance which is always getting modified and no new instances are created. Obviously, that is important. And there are quite a few things available inside the HTTP context object, and all of them are basically listed over here, but we will go through some of the important ones in this video. So to start with, let's just say we first of all go to our application, okay, and let's target one route where we will look at these things. So let's take this one, expenses, like so. Let me open up the network tab as well. And now, the first thing which we can see in the documentation, it says is I can destructure things when the HTTP context is provided, because this is a route, so which means these things are automatically injected through the framework. Now inside our controller, that means I can do something like HTTP context contract over here. So if you look at any controller which you create right through the CLI, this line is basically commented out. So by default, you may not require them. Like right now, we are only returning this simple JSON object, right? So we don't need anything from the HTTP context contract. But now that we are referencing the request object, we need to do that. So why don't we do something like HTTP context contract? I haven't uncommented it. So context contract, it says it's declared but never used, which is fine. I need to do console.log request, and the comma is missing. Let's see. Okay, so cannot destructure property request of undefined. That's interesting, which means the framework is not injecting the request or the HTTP context. I think this is happening because, yes, if this was on this particular URL, let's just say if I comment this out, okay, and do this. Oh, no, this is inside. Yeah, that should work. Let me see. If I refresh, it works. Right. The reason is obviously because this is a string based declaration, right? So most probably the framework is able to understand that it needs to inject the context. Whereas let's undo in here, because I'm passing it like this, I'll have to pass the context. It will get inside the route. If you see the documentation, where is it? This is something where we are getting the context. So here the framework will inject it, but in here I need to pass it. Now ideally it should work. Let's see. Yes, it does. And do we get something in the logs? Yes, we do. So there are quite a few things in the request object. Obviously we won't be able to understand everything, but the basic thing is that the request object is coming. If we want to dig deep, and let's look at something which we want to get from the request object, so we can do a dot, and because it is TypeScript, it will give us a lot of options. So we have accepts, ajax, all. All is basically, whenever we have requests which are, if it is a post request, you will get all the inputs. If it's a get request, you will get all the parameters. So yeah, quite a few things are there. Let's go through a few important ones. For example, this is one. If you want to see what is the current URL, hit refresh. Yeah, we should get /expenses3. Expense3, sorry. Yes. So you see, we are getting the URL. That's fine. That's good. Let's just say we have input. What does the input definition says? It expects key and the default value. Right. So which means, let's just take an example. Name and John. So what does this mean? It means we are looking for an input inside the request object with a key name, and if it is not available, give me default value as John. So hit refresh, go to the terminal, we are getting John. But if I do question mark, without, oops, my spelling is wrong, that's weird. I can't type my name properly. And yes, as you can see, when the value is present, it gives me that particular value, but when it is not present, it gives a default value. And yes, if we want to get everything, which is a mix of, let's just say, post and get everything, right? All is something which you can look at. It might interest you. So again, right now, if I refresh, my understanding is I'll get this, and inside all, I'm getting name, which is fine. It will give me the object and country equals India. Now, if you see, the request is obviously Amitabh because we are very specific about the key which we are interested in, but request all gives me all. How nice. Okay, now the next important piece is obviously response, right? And what we can do is inside response, there is a method which we should typically use, which is response dot. Okay, there is abort, there is abort if, but the important one is send, right? So for those who have worked with Laravel, I think the context is quite clear. When you are returning a view, right? Directly, if you return a view, Laravel understands that it needs to send out HTML, and it does that. It automatically adjusts. And when you are returning an array in Laravel, or any controller for that matter, right? It understands that it will be a JSON object, and the very same behavior we can see over here. So far, if you see, I was not doing any response.send or anything, but I was just returning an object or an array or something like that, and the framework was intelligent enough to work with those kind of changes, right? So if we do here, this thing will also work, and nothing is going to change over here. I can see that the response inside the headers, we should be still sending what? Request headers and response headers, right? It is an application JSON. Okay, now one more interesting and important flag is if you hover over it, or if you click and go inside, you will see there is a second tag which is generate Etag. Okay, now if you are aware what is Etag, then it is good. I will show you. If we do true, hit save. Now just see this. There is connection, content length, date, keep alive. Hit refresh. There's one more thing which is Etag, right? Now it allows you to generate Etags, and for those who don't know what is Etag, this is a mechanism where all the GET requests can use this to cache URLs. Okay, the browser will understand this. What generally happens is when first time the browser makes a GET request to this particular URL, it will get the data and it will get the Etag. Now, the next time when the browser hits this URL, the Etag is just returned. Now the browser checks the Etag. If it finds that the Etag which it already had and the new Etag are same, that means the browser understands that there is no change in the response. And hence, you save a lot of time in bandwidth because the JSON object, which was already there, stored in the browser as a cache object, is returned back. Whereas if there is any change, what is going to happen is the Etag, which was saved on the browser, doesn't match with what is there on the server, and so the new requested JSON object will be consumed by the browser. It will again save and it will update the new Etag so that it doesn't need to fetch it again from the server. Okay, so if you are trying to do that kind of a caching, it is definitely very helpful, right? Okay, moving along. There is one more thing apart from request all if you really want only the query string parameters, because request all will merge the get requests and the post request. But if you do QS, okay, it gives you all the URL parameters. Now obviously this will not make a difference from here because I'm not doing any post request and this URL is not supposed to take a post request. But when you have something like a post request with question marks, right, it will definitely allow you to take on the QS if there's a requirement, obviously. Okay, what else? Let's see the documentation. So we have seen the request, we have seen the response. Logger is an interesting thing. Yes, I'll show you. So what happens is if you are willing to do certain kinds of logs in run, or rather expose some information through logs, right? We typically do that. So that particular object is available. Logger dot, and it gives you a lot of different variations. For example, you can do error, you can do info. So I'll show you. This is an information, and let's just do logger dot error. Something bad happened, right? Let's just go to our application, hit refresh, and here we have our logs. One is info, okay, and it says this is an information, and the second one is an error, something bad happened. So throughout your application, you can have these kind of logs if you want to see them on the application logs on your server, and it will help you in debugging, right? It will really help because sometimes you typically will not have console logs, right? But if you want to track certain things, this logger is your go-to option. Okay, one more important point is the auth. I mean, there is routes, route can have different things inside it, and there is params, but we will go deep into params when we do routes in detail. But the auth is something which is important to know. Okay, so far we haven't created the database, so we will not be able to log in or set up things. But what I understand is that the auth object is available when we have this package. So let's see, reference to the auth object available only when this package is installed. Okay, so let's see what is happening over here. So Adonis comes with a full-fledged authentication system to authenticate the users of your application using sessions, basic auth, or API tokens. Right. Now, how do we get that? That's interesting. So let's just install this first. Now, obviously, you need to understand that the auth package relies on Lucid package. Okay, and Lucid is basically going to talk to the database, and we haven't set up our database yet. So we are going to be able to advance only till a point where I'll be able to show you that the auth object does exist, but beyond that, it will start failing. So let it happen. So once you install, there is a configuration what happens is it creates certain things, like it creates the model, the database, contracts, config, a few middlewares, and these two files. So this is Adonis RC JSON providers plus equals this, okay, and the manifest.json. That's fine. Okay, it is installed. Let's look at some of the things. Okay, sorry, my bad. I haven't installed the package or rather initiated this command, so nothing is going to happen. Now it will ask me certain questions. So as the documentation said, right, it expects the ORM to be there. So uses data models, yes, Lucid. Select which guard you need for authentication. Okay, so this is web-based. If I am doing, session-based thing, I can do basic auth, but I will be using API token. So let's go with this. Select using spacebar, right? Enter model name to be used for authentication. That will be user. Create migrations, yes. Database, yes, yes, and it is doing something. It created model. So let's look at that. App models user.ts. So here is my model with its column definitions. Okay. Database has migrations as well. That's nice. So this is how the migrations will be created, and the model has a reference of the kind of properties which are there. Okay, so yes, we have what do we have? We can look at the model as well. So ID, email, password is very similar to what I'm used to looking at in Nest.js as well, using type ORM. But yeah, this ORM I think is a little taking things from there. But yeah, these definitions will definitely help, because when you're working with those models, right, and when you do a dot, you will get all these keys, which are very interesting. Okay, and it is in before save as well. So on before save, the hash password means I don't need to hash the password before saving it. It is automatically going to happen. So I just inside a model instance, like for example, user.password equals something like my password. Okay, and I'm done. I don't need to run the hash and hash it at that point. That is a good thing. Okay. It checks for dirty as well, which is again a nice thing. This is before save, which means there are hooks available. We should be looking at them. Migration is quite straightforward, I think. For those of you who already know, this file will be used to create a table. Okay, and here we define the columns which are required in our table. That's what the migration is going to do. There is create table. This is and this code will be executed when you run the migration. You have the ability to revert back as well, and that's where down is going to get executed. And what it does is it drops the table. So inside up, we are creating the table. Inside drop, we are deleting the table. So that's how the migration will work. One tip here that I will give you is that migrations, when you run it on production, you have the ability to stop the reverts, because rollbacks, or not reverts, rather rollbacks, because rollback by mistake can result in data loss. So be very careful. I think there's a config for that, if I'm not wrong. Migration, I read somewhere, I'm not very sure where it was. Let me see quickly if I can find it. Allow spoofing, subdomain, generated request ID, Etag. That's force content negotiation, logger, enabled. Okay, pretty print, everything is there. I'm pretty sure I have read somewhere. Let me try to quickly do that. No, it was, where was it then? Okay, maybe we will get that while we look at the migration. But yes, you can disable the rollback completely on production, and that is a good thing to do, because then you will never by mistake delete the thing. Okay, maybe it is somewhere else, I don't know. But yeah, while I was having having a problem with certain things, I was reading up on that and I figured that out. So yeah. Yeah, not here as well. Anyway, so that's about it, guys. That's how the context is being passed on. We saw that when you are referencing the controller and the method as a string, it automatically injects the context, because this is the route, so the framework understands it. But when we have these kind of syntaxes, you need to manually inject it so that the method inside the controller has access to that particular context. That's our HTTP context contract, and we have a lot of things over here. If you want to dig deep, you can definitely do that. There are quite a few things. Oops, I always thought I would be able to get inside it. Okay, anyways. So yeah, that's about it, guys. If you like this video, do click on the thumbs up icon and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.